Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Your boy Kyle is back with the fantasy headliners, and we've got some rankings here for you this week. I'm going to be covering my top 36 wide receivers and a few that might be just on the outside looking in. And then I've got my top 18 tight ends for everybody. So you got to hit the like button for me. You got to subscribe if you're new here to the channel. And let's go ahead and let this thing rip, baby. And let's hop into it on the wide receiver side. Davante Adams is going to kick things off as the number one wide receiver for me this week, going up against New England. Honestly, if there's one guy that we can bet on getting more than enough volume every single week, it's Davante Adams, because then it's him and nobody else on his team right now that really is any type of a threat to catch the football. Josh Jacobs is going to run it. Davante Adams is going to catch it. Number 2, Keenan Allen, and this might seem like a pretty hot take to some of you, but he is the wide receiver 5 over the last several weeks. The dude looks absolutely crisp right now, and he's going up against a Tennessee offense that allows the most fantasy points to wide receivers. You better bet your bottom dollar that Keenan Allen is going to have himself one heck of a week. Justin Jefferson would be the number one overall wide receiver this week if it wasn't for facing Indianapolis, that allows the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. But guess what? We're still going to roll him out there anyway. And actually, I think I misspoke. They allow the fewest points to wide receivers. Denver allows the second fewest now. So Justin Jefferson had a tough matchup, but like we saw with Detroit last week, if you give him enough volume, he's going to put up yards. Garrett Wilson going up against Detroit. Basically the same thing Justin Jefferson did last week. He did end up finding the end zone, but it was bend, don't break all day long. You can bet that Garrett Wilson is going to be up there. Now, if Zach Wilson is announced as the starter for this game, my opinion on this will drop dramatically. This ranking is based on my thought that either Joe Flacco or Mike White will end up being the starter this week. Those are two pretty... For me right now, we're kind of throwing ourselves in the hole of we don't know. So Garrett Wilson, if either of those two guys start, we're good. If it is not them, though, and it is Zach Wilson, we are probably going to have to drop Garrett Wilson considerably. Stefon Diggs is going to come in at number 5. Going to be some bad weather there, it looks like, in Buffalo this week. Going up against Miami. Even in these bad weather games, Stefon Diggs has proved time and time again that he can still see a decent amount of volume, and he's the one guy kind of in the matchup that can be trusted. Jamar Chase going up against Tampa Bay. He's at number 6. A whole lot of upside for him this week, especially considering the fact that we could end up missing Higgins and Boyd both. Now, the upside for Jamar Chase could even end up going up even higher, again, when we find out about Garrett Wilson and who his starter is going to be. And maybe for some of you, if you don't trust the weather that much, or maybe it doesn't end up being nearly as bad as what they anticipate right now, Stefon Diggs could drop a little bit. Jamar Chase ends up going up too. Tyreek Hill is going to come in at number 7. Another kind of question mark with that game, but Tyreek Hill, again, is a guy that does so much. They can do end arounds with him. They can hit him on the slants. They can go down the field. Because he can do so much, I still feel like they're going to find themselves in a position to get him the targets that he needs. DeAndre Hopkins, Denver's going to be a tough matchup for him this week, especially considering the fact that he's got a quarterback that, is Colt McCoy. He doesn't have his buddy Kyler Murray anymore. That's going to help drop that upside just a little bit for me. Michael Pittman Jr. going up against Minnesota. Minnesota now allows the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Michael Pittman Jr. gets more than enough volume as well to be inside my top 12 this week. Chris Olave going up against Atlanta. Only has 4 games this season when he doesn't have 60 or more receiving yards. We want him to score more. Going up against Atlanta, that's a distinct possibility. CeeDee Lamb against Jacksonville. I'd love to go higher with him, but Zeke and Pollard are sniping all the touchdowns right now, and they're running the ball an awful lot. That limits the upside of CeeDee Lamb. A.J. Brown against Chicago. He's the number 1 on that team right now in terms of targets. He's the guy getting everything. He's a top 12 wide receiver pretty much every single week. DK Metcalf has a tougher game against San Francisco coming up, although San Francisco does allow quite a few fantasy points to wide receivers. That might catch you off guard with how dominant their defense has been this year. But again, if they get up on teams and other teams are just throwing it, they're going to amass some of those wide receiver points. Amon-Ra St. Brown is unfortunately going to drop outside the top 12 for me. Not that he necessarily deserves it. It is a tougher matchup for the New York Jets. They do play a lot worse on the road than they do at home. He is matchup proof though, so he's not going to be just stale on the outside against the top cornerbacks. He's going to be all over the place. Mike Williams, another high upside play this week, going up against Tennessee. The only reason I don't have him higher is because I think Keenan Allen is going to get the majority of the volume this week. Tyler Lockett, basically everything I just mentioned about DK Metcalf. Tough defense, but they can throw it around a little bit if they end up getting behind, and San Francisco will give up some of those points because they're really just trying to prevent touchdowns at that point. Tyler Lockett has a touchdown in 6 straight games. Can he keep that going? Christian Kirk going up against Dallas. We'll probably see some Trayvon Diggs this week. Going to limit that upside just a little bit, but against Dallas, we're probably going to be throwing it. And if Dallas can't get the pass rush home, if they can't create that pressure on Trevor Lawrence to get him outside the pocket and make him uncomfortable, Dallas could end up getting carved up a little bit this week. They've got to get that pressure home. Jalen Waddle, we're dropping him down significantly all the way to wide receiver 18 right now. Again, the matchup isn't really that bad. Buffalo allows quite a few fantasy points to wide receivers. Their secondary isn't nearly as tough on wide receivers as we've seen in recent years. But this is probably going to be a bad weather game, and with the way Tua has played recently, it does worry me that Jalen Waddle, again, seeing all those things go to Tyreek Hill, is not going to see anything himself. Number 19, Christian Watson continues to find the end zone. And just like with Buffalo, this secondary for the Rams just isn't as tough as what we've seen in recent years. So Christian Watson, definitely a lot of big play upside this week going up against Buffalo. Juju Smith-Schuster at number 20 going up against Houston. Houston allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. But like I mentioned in the start and sit video, I believe that Kansas City is a team that even when you get in a position where you're going to run, they still throw it anyway. The offense just doesn't give up. They don't let off the pedal. You're going to see plenty of passing attempts. Kadarius Toney, is he back this week? As of this recording, there's no word on that yet. That could limit some upside for Juju. And with it being Houston, we're finally going to get an idea of how good is their secondary. Are they really that good, or is it just because everyone runs on them? Amari Cooper going up against Baltimore. A little bit more of a risky start this week, coming in at number 21 for me. Just a little bit worried. Is Deshaun Watson going to take another step or not? Chris Godwin coming up against Cincinnati, wide receiver 22. That offense right now just isn't doing what it needs to. And Cincinnati's pretty darn good against the pass. Now, I think Chris Godwin could still see 8, 10, 12 targets somewhere in that area. But if he doesn't score, is he going to have enough big plays to give you those 10 or more fantasy points? Terry McLaurin against the New York Giants. The only reason I don't have Terry McLaurin higher is because I believe Jahan Dotson's going to have a pretty good day as well. Jerry Jeudy just scored 3 touchdowns. Probably needs to even have a little bit of a higher ranking than this. So if you say, Kyle, 24 is too low for Jerry Jeudy, I probably would agree with you. But going up against Arizona, not knowing who that quarterback is going to be, if they're going to play Russ, if it's going to be Ripon, we don't know that yet. I'm just accounting for all that information. Alec Pierce at number 25. He's got a lot of big play potential against a Minnesota team that gives up big plays all the time. Jameson Williams, DJ Chark, we just saw that last week where those big plays were putting them down in the dirt very early. Deontay Johnson at number 26 doesn't have a whole lot of upside because he doesn't score, but should see the targets, should see some decent yards. Mike Evans at number 27. I hate doing this to Mike Evans because once again, as I mentioned in my start and sit video, he's really like 4 catches away from having much bigger weeks over the last several weeks. I mean, it seems like every single week he either has a huge play called back or a huge touchdown called back. I mean, all of his bigger plays as of recent keep getting called back due to penalties, and that is not good, obviously, for his fantasy value, but it's something that's overlooked quite a bit. Does he deserve to be higher than 27? Absolutely. But again, a tougher defense, and this offense just isn't gelling right now. So what are we really going to see this week? Brandon Ayuk at number 28. He's the only San Francisco wide receiver that's really worth starting right now since Debo is going to be hurt. He's going to see the targets, but Seattle, they're in that top 6 of fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They've done a really good job of limiting plays this year. So is it going to be Brandon Ayuk week? Is it going to be George Kittle, or is Christian McCaffrey just going to be the breadwinner this week? Marquise Brown at number 29. Again, a very difficult matchup and a second string quarterback. 30 is going to be Allen Lazard, really touchdown dependent for me. Jahan Dotson at number 31, also touchdown dependent for me, but potentially some big plays. 2 weeks ago against the New York Giants, before the bye, he did score a touchdown against them. He had about 60 receiving yards. Definitely the big big play could be there. Zay Jones is going to be at number 32 going up against Dallas. If we do see Diggs on Christian Kirk a lot, it could leave Zay Jones open quite a bit. And if that happens, we're probably going to see some more targets to him. But as I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, if he doesn't get those targets consistently, the ceiling's not there. So how many targets does he actually get? Josh Palmer at number 33. The only reason he isn't higher is because Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are in line for big days. But you can start Josh Palmer as well in this really nice matchup. Donovan Peoples-Jones at number 34. Huge week with Deshaun Watson. Over 100 receiving yards for the first time this season. I mean, he was going through a stretch where if you booked 60 receiving yards, you could basically lock that in for him. Now we're at a point later in the season where Cleveland's coming out and saying, we want to actually try and throw deeper a little bit more now. If they do, Donovan Peoples-Jones is that guy. Devontae Smith at number 35 going up against Chicago. Dallas Goedert appears to be back this week. Because of that, we probably need to take a few targets away from Devontae Smith. Drake London is going to just barely make it inside the top 36. He's really the only wide receiver healthy, but will Marshawn Lattimore play this week? A few guys that are just on the outside looking in. T. Higgins and Jakobi Meyers, both are due to injuries. Even if T. Higgins were to play this week, I don't know how much we trust him. 2 different games this season, he's head out onto the field for the first play of the game and not seen the field the rest of the day because of a hamstring injury. Do they even risk it with him? They want him healthy for a playoff run. They might just sit him this week. Jakobi Meyers will have to wait and hear on them. Nelson Aguilar kind of falls into that same line as Jakobi Meyers because right now we don't really know who's going to be playing wide receiver. Some injuries last week. I mean, who's going to be out there? Only time will tell. Adam Thielen is very, very touchdown dependent in a big Indianapolis matchup this week. That's going to be very tough. Gabe Davis is touchdown dependent, but because of that weather, I've now knocked him outside the 36, knowing if he doesn't hit that huge touchdown, you're probably not going to have him make your fantasy day. This was a reason why I told everyone in the start and sit video that you had to check back on the rankings later in the week. Gabe Davis is a guy that I'm probably going to sit now. Chris Moore, we look like that will be trending without Brandon Cooks and without Nico Collins this week. Also, no Dameon Pierce. Chris Moore in a matchup against Kansas City that allows the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends, wide receivers. He's now going to be a start for me. Now, how high do we want to go with him? Well, a lot of that depends on when are they actually ruled out. Who else might be ruled out? What other factors do we have to consider? For me, I would also be okay in a PPR league, moving him up to like low-end wide receiver 2. If you're in a half or a standard, I'm more comfortable as a wide receiver 3. Elijah Moore, he could be in for a good day against Detroit right now. I just don't know if the ceiling is high enough for him without a touchdown. George Pickens is a guy that Deontay Johnson was mentioned earlier, but if Mitchell Trubisky is the starter this week, the upside just is not there for George Pickens. And then Laviska Shenault and DJ Moore, both of them going up against Pittsburgh. We should be able to play them in this matchup, but Sam Darnold spread the ball around to so many different targets last week. DJ Moore is currently banged up. Laviska Shenault, if he sees 6 targets, does he even get to 60 receiving yards? Those are all questions that would have to be answered later on and make it a little bit more risky for me. Let's move on to my top 18 tight ends, and we're going to kick it off with Travis Kelce going up against Houston. My hope is that he gets a lot of his points in the first half, so we don't have to sweat it out in the second half of do they run the football? How much are they up by? Things of that nature. TJ Hockenson is going to be number 2 for me this week because with it being such a tough matchup for the wide receivers, I think we see a whole lot of TJ Hockenson. I like the potential for him this week. Mark Andrews is still going to stay at number 3 going up against Cleveland. I don't care who the quarterback is. I don't care that he's had back-to-back bad weeks. I'm still going to throw Mark Andrews up here because he's the number 1 target by far in that offense. Pat Freiermuth going up against Carolina. He sees all the targets in the world from Kenny Pickett. And if we go to Mitchell Trubisky in this matchup as well, he's probably going to see quite a bit of targets, especially considering the fact Trubisky had 3 interceptions last week. David Njoku, touchdowns in back-to-back week with Deshaun Watson. Those two are starting to connect. I like this Baltimore matchup for him. Dalton Schultz against Jacksonville. The upside just isn't there because, again, they're running the football so much, and the running backs are getting those red zone touchdowns, so Dalton Schultz just lacks a little bit of that upside. George Kittle going up against Seattle. I would like to go a little bit higher higher with him considering the fact that Debo is going to be out, but he's just still a little risky right now. He's got a higher upside. His upside for me is above Mark Andrews, but if we take a look at his floor is probably right here. Dawson Knox is going to come in at number 8 against Miami. I love Dawson Knox to find the end zone this week, and in a tough matchup with the weather, potentially be the number 1 target for them outside Stephon Diggs. Cole Kmet against Philadelphia. We know he's Justin Fields' top target, and the wide receiver matchups are going to be tough. Greg Dulcich against Arizona. If there's no Cortland Sutton, then this is a guy that comes in right about number 10 for me, considering how bad Arizona is against the tight end position. Dallas Goedert is going to sneak into the top 12, coming in at number 11, and his return to the lineup, hopefully, at this point has not been guaranteed or officially activated for the game. Keep an eye on that throughout the weekend, but I've got him right here at number 11. I'm just waiting to see if he is fully healthy when back on the field. Evan Ingram at number 12, coming off a huge 2-touchdown, 162-yard performance. Everyone is going to want to start Evan Ingram. Dallas allows the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position per game. Be careful with this matchup. If you are starting Evan Ingram, even considering what he did last week, you've already screwed yourself. Gerald Everett comes in at number 13 against Tennessee. Tennessee would like to go higher, but I can't. Why? Because the wide receivers are so high. Tyler Conklin is who's going to be the starter. If it's Joe Flacco this week, we know that he loved Tyler Conklin earlier in the season. I'm going to go with Tyler Conklin all the way up to tight end number 9 if Joe Flacco ends up being the starter. Chiggy coming in at number 15. I'd like to go higher with Chiggy, but if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's barely a top 12 play as it is. I like the potential. I like him as an athlete. I think he's going to be a very good football player, and he's a potential breakout candidate for me next year, but we just don't have it yet with him right now. Hunter Henry at number 16. Again, the wide receiver position is very banged up right now. Is that good for Hunter Henry, or will those guys end up being back this week and take those targets away? Juwan Johnson is very touchdown dependent against Atlanta, but he could end up being a guy that is a very safe spot here for Desmond, or not for Desmond Ridder making his first start, excuse me. But he's in a very safe space here going up against a team in Desmond Ridder that's making his first start. New Orleans could be in a position where they maybe get out, the defense plays well, and now we're maybe running the football a little bit more against Atlanta, and we just don't see those opportunities because the defense capitalizes on Desmond Ridder's start. So for Juwan Johnson, that ceiling's just a little bit limited to me, especially if they don't find the end zone. And then Tyler Higbee is going to come in at number 18. Why? Because he gets almost more targets than any tight end in the National Football League right now. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be my rankings for the week. Hopefully you all appreciated them. If you didn't agree with something, let me know why. Give me a constructive, well-worded, intelligent argument to why maybe you don't agree with some of the rankings here, and let me know down in the comments below. Those are the ones I like to see, not how stupid I am. Number 2, gotta hit the like button, gotta subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure you stick around for the content the rest of the week. Don't forget, we'll be live on Friday night this week because Saturday has football games. So ladies and gentlemen, for me, I'm gonna get out of here. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.